I have no voice, my blood pressure is through the roof, and we tied? Grossi Posse Packer Nation. Welcome to an episode of Packcast, the podcast where you don't have to be a Packers fan, but it sure does help. I'm your host, Tom. Yeah, that was a game, Grossi. And today we are going to be talking about the Green Bay Packers tying the Dallas Cowboys with a score of 40-40. And for those who are looking for the post-game reaction, Cowboys and Packers fan reaction to that game, I literally have no voice, so I apologize. I'll get that out in the morning. I'll wake up extra early to do that. But let's talk about this game, because heading into this game as a Packers fan, there was a lot of hype, right? This is the Micah Parsons revenge game. On top of that, every time the Packers and Cowboys play, usually something crazy happens. And to be fair, something crazy did happen tonight with a 40-40 tie. And there is just so much frustration after this game. And as a Packers fan heading into this game, I have to say, besides the Micah Parsons revenge angle, I thought the Packers would be able to take care of business pretty easily against the Cowboys. You look at their first 2 weeks, knocking off the Lions and playing really well against the Commanders. And last week against Cleveland, while it did not end well and ultimately things blew up at the end of that game and they lost, it was like, okay, the defense still played really, really well. The offense did enough, but unfortunately a turnover from Jordan Love late, a blocked field goal ultimately sealed their fate, and they lost that game. And so heading into this week, after the Cowboys just lost, by the way, very badly to the Chicago Bears, where they didn't sack Caleb Williams a single time, and their defense made Caleb Williams look like a superstar. Yeah, I anticipated the Packers were going to win this game by a decent margin. And what happened? I have no freaking idea.
Hey, what the hell is going on out there?
Let's talk about some stats before we jump into this game. Jordan Love had a really, really nice game. 31 for 43, 337 yards, 3 touchdowns. Love got sacked one time, which resulted in a fumble right before half. And just like the end of the Cleveland Browns game, within 40 seconds, the Cowboys had scored double-digit points, and that completely changed the complexion of this game. And so the Packers, while they didn't do it at the end of regulation, they did it right before half, and ultimately, it's one of the reasons why this game is tied. But other than that, Jordan Love deserves a ton of credit. Hell, even Micah Parsons went over to Jordan Love and was like, I am so sorry for the way our defense played, because you balled the hell out tonight. On top of that, taking a look at our run game, things were not much better. Josh Jacobs, 22 carries for 86 yards, had 2 touchdowns, which is great. However, was still averaging 3.9 yards per carry. And this, unfortunately, has been the tale of the Packers' run game for the first 4 weeks of this season. Josh Jacobs is a very good running back, but they're not able to really lean on the run game and get that kind of balance they're looking for on offense. Emmanuel Wilson did much better. He had 8 carries for 44 yards and was averaging 5.5 yards per carry. So a big shout out to him. And overall, the Packers got 164 rushing yards total between all their ball carriers tonight, which again was more than enough to win this football game. However, they're not really able to lean on the run like they were with Josh Jacobs all of last season. And so far, that has been frustrating. One of the major reasons, that offensive line. Even though Jordan Love was only sacked one time, the beginning of that game, that offensive line was bad. They were not run blocking, pass blocking. Jordan Love was constantly under duress, and it made for a very frustrating game. Now, Zach Tom and Aaron Banks were missing. Of course, this was announced earlier this week, but Zach Tom is desperately someone that this team needs back. And with this week 5 bye next week, it could not be coming any sooner. Taking a look at the receiving game, Josh Jacobs was our leading receiver with 71 yards. Romeo Doubs, what a freaking night. Only 6 receptions, 3 of them were for touchdowns. Had 58 yards and one hell of a performance. Romeo Doubs, who with Jaden Reed being out has stepped up and looked really, really good tonight. On top of that, Matthew Golden, 5 for 58, and that last attempt at a touchdown at the very end of overtime was to Matthew Golden. It was in double coverage, though, so it was going to be tough for him to get the ball. But Matthew Golden, who a lot of Packers fans were talking about, how he's not getting more targets, over the last 2 weeks has gotten more targets, so that is nice to see. On top of that, Tucker Kraft, 5 receptions for 56 yards. And taking a look at the offense, the frustrating thing comes from 2 parts. The first thing is going to be the offensive line, which you could chalk up to a bunch of injuries, and yes, that is a viable excuse for why that offensive line is not looking as good. However, it does seem like it's a little bit more than just injuries, but again, we'll see after the bye week, and hopefully guys return from injury, and we'll see what that offensive line actually looks like and how it's going to aid things like the run game. But the second thing has to be the play calling at times. The situational play calling for Matt LaFleur was not great tonight. You look at that very last play in overtime, and good God, they almost Matt Eberflused it. Jordan Love throwing it into the back of the end zone, and that entire last drive, it looks like they were taking their time, which they really didn't have a lot of time to spare. And of course, you're worrying about the Cowboys getting it back. Their offense was unstoppable tonight. We'll talk about the defense in a minute. But at times it felt like the Packers were playing not to lose. And unfortunately, this got them into this situation last week against the Cleveland Browns, and here it reared its ugly head once again. Now, I'm not going to sit here and go fire Matt LaFleur or anything, but there are times where this team needs to get better in certain situations, especially near the end of that game where clock management becomes really important. And to be very honest with you, the Packers got bailed out that there was 1 second remaining, because otherwise we would be sitting here talking about a Packers loss. But overall for the offense, 489 total yards. Like I said, Jordan Love was really, really good tonight. I know there's plenty of fans who were super pissed at him last week for that interception, but here he played a really, really good game and deserves some credit for that. Now, let's talk about the defense. Quay Walker leading the team in tackles once again, 11 total tackles, 6 solo, 1 for a loss. Only 1 sack on the night on Dak Prescott, and that belonged to Micah Parsons near the end of the game. And even though it wasn't a loss for any yards, it may have been a game-saving tackle, because as Dak was running towards the end zone, Micah Parsons was able to chase after him, grab him by the legs, and bring him down. But other than that, holy God, let's talk about this defense. Devontae Wyatt getting injured definitely made a difference in this game, but good God, this defense, where was the defense that we saw from the first 3 weeks? They couldn't stop the run tonight. They couldn't get after Dak Prescott. And on top of that, the secondary, it was a rough night for guys like Carrington Valentine and Nate Hobbs. And I love Carrington Valentine to death. It was just a rough night overall for that secondary. Dak went 31 for 40, 319 yards, and 3 touchdowns. We mentioned the 1 sack from Micah Parsons. And I got to be clear, too. While we could definitely criticize the Packers' defense right now, Dak Prescott played a really good game. They had a game plan for the pass rush of the Packers, and it worked to perfection. Because for the majority of the night, Dak Prescott looked pretty comfortable back there. Javonte Williams, 20 carries for 85 yards, a total of 117 rushing yards for the Cowboys, which is the most allowed by the Packers this season. So the run defense, who knows where that went? We already talked about them not being able to get after Dak. George Pickens was lighting it up, 8 receptions for 134 yards and 2 touchdowns. Jake Ferguson, 7 for 40 with another touchdown. And so the Packers defense allowed 436 yards of total offense from the Cowboys. And yeah, man, it was a rough night. And the problem I have is obviously you saw what the Bears did to this team last week. But on top of that, it's the first 3 weeks of Packers defense where I'm sitting here as a Packers fan going, oh, this team could be a potential Super Bowl contender because they are looking so good. Where is this team that held Montgomery and Gibbs to under 50 yards? Where is this team that held the Commanders for under 50 yards? It was nowhere to be seen tonight. And that is the concerning part I have about this Packers game, because the defense did not look good. And considering you're spending all this money on Micah Parsons, you're giving up the draft capital, you just want to see more production out of guys like Lucas Van Ness, Rashawn Gary, who lost his 5-game sack streak. And overall, it was just a really tough night for this defense. And again, you got to give credit to the Cowboys offense. They came in with a really good game plan, and Dak executed that to perfection. But yeah, this was a very, very disappointing on the Packers' defensive side of the ball. Now, after talking about the defense, let's talk about that special teams. For the second week in a row, a blocked kick was incredibly costly for the Packers. Of course, against the Cleveland Browns, McManus getting that field goal blocked, which could have been a game winner, resulted in the Browns ultimately kicking their own game winner. And here, after the Packers scored 2 touchdowns pretty early on in that game, McManus has an extra point blocked, and it's returned for 2 points, which was a huge swing in this game. We talk about the collapse before halftime that the Packers had tonight, but good God, man, this is now 2 weeks in a row with a blocked kick, and the question has to be, what is going on with Rich Bisaccia?
What the hell is going on out there?
We got to talk about Dan Whelan, who's been doing a great job punting this year. But considering how much money the Packers have poured into Bisaccia and how much this special teams has not gotten better over the past couple seasons, I feel like there's some conversations that need to be had. And I know Matt LaFleur does not like making those personnel adjustments. Hell, if you're a Packers fan, you know all about their special teams woes in the past. Hell, it's one of the reasons why they lost that divisional game against the 49ers years back when they had Aaron Rodgers. And hopefully they can fix things this season. But again, when you're paying Rich Bisaccia all of that money, he's the highest paid special teams coordinator in the league. Yeah, the product on the field has got to get better. On top of that, there was a lack of discipline for both teams. 11 accepted penalties for the Cowboys and 7 for the Packers. And unfortunately for penalties, this has been a reoccurring issue for the Packers this season. And while they didn't have as many penalties as the Cowboys, these are the kind of things that are going to cost teams down the line. And so heading into the bye week, after all that and a 40-40 tie, where does this leave the Packers? I think the first 2 weeks, a very stark contrast to the last 2 weeks. The Packers defense was really good over the first 3 games, but they were non-existent tonight. To go from allowing the Browns to score 13 to the Cowboys scoring 40, and again, giving credit to Dallas, this just seems to be a significant drop-off, and one that you gotta hope gets better as the season goes along, as Micah Parsons gets more game ready and gets healthier and healthier. You gotta hope that this defense is able to put it together, and you see what you saw those first 2 weeks, because the potential is there. But ultimately, on the defensive side of the ball, they have to improve. Meanwhile, on the offense, they have to be able to rely on the ground game. Shout out to Josh Jacobs. He did what he could tonight. And on top of that, that offensive line has to get healthier. They have to get better at blocking, whether it's creating run lanes or it's protecting Jordan Love. Yeah, just a lot of question marks heading into this bye week. And like I said, this team just very much looks like Jekyll and Hyde from the first 2 weeks to the last 2 weeks. And even if they beat the Cleveland Browns, this week is still concerning for the Packers. I know it's September football, and ultimately when we get to November, we're going to get a sense of what these teams' identities really are. But after the first 4 weeks, I don't know what the identity for the Packers are at this point. You look at a stout defense that did a really good job the first 3 weeks, and this, yeah, which one's a fluke? I honestly don't know. But as the season goes along and after this bye week, hopefully we get a pretty productive answer on that. And so ultimately, the Packers don't walk away with a win, but they also don't walk away with a loss. They are now second in the NFC North, as the Vikings were the only team in the division to lose. But the Lions, after knocking down Cleveland today, reclaim the NFC North, at least for now. And for the Packers, God, I can't wait for some stress-free football on Sunday. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. You can always find me at TomGrossiComedy.com. A big shout out and thank you to all the Patreon members and YouTube members for supporting this channel. And thank you so much for watching. Sorry this video is coming out late. I'll get you the reaction tomorrow morning when I have a little bit more of a voice. But folks, thank you so much for watching. I'm Tom Grossi. And as always, go Pack Go.